Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Climate Change in America's National Parks webinar series, where every month we invite guest speakers to join us every second Thursday to share with us in the ways in which they're tackling climate change issues all over the nation, in our national parks and outside of them as well. I am Matt Hawley with the Climate Change Response Program for the National Park Service here in Fort Collins, Colorado. Really happy to be having all of you join us here today. Before we kick off right into the webinar itself, I want to go over just a little bit about how this webinar works and what you have just joined. And after that, then I'll introduce our speakers. But first, just a quick overview of how this works. Basically, like I said, every second Thursday of the month, we have a guest speaker, or speakers in this case, that present an issue related to some aspect in climate change for up to an hour. Then we open it up for a Q&A period afterwards for a maximum total of about 90 minutes. Now that said, I don't expect this to go that long. Most of them do not. We just, block that much time in the calendar just in case. My guess is we'll have about 45 minutes presentation and then whatever questions and answers we have after that. The way that you all will be asking questions is through your questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. You're going to see that panel is probably on the right-hand side of your screen. And what that is you can have all these different panels, audio, dashboard. You want to open the one that says questions. Type those in anytime during the presentation. Those will all come to me, and then I will relay them to our speakers at the end of their presentation. I like to wait until the end rather than interrupting in the middle. And that's because I know a lot of our attendees, you're only having limited time while you're on here with us. So I want to make sure you have a chance to hear the entire presentation before we go into that Q&A. But that said, type them in, keep them coming throughout the presentation. I'll be sitting on them just until the end, and then I'll have a chance to ask them verbally. You're all muted, so you won't have a chance to ask them. But that's okay, because it means you can eat your lunch and do whatever you need to do, and we are not going to be hearing you chewing. If you also have questions that maybe you're not able to stay until the Q&A period, that's okay, because I'm going to send you all a follow-up email that'll include our speakers' email addresses. So you will have a chance to ask them questions directly after the fact if maybe we just weren't able to answer it very well, or you just couldn't make it that long. So we'll have a chance to make sure that you get your questions answered regardless. What I also do is I record this webinar. You will have a video recording sent to you after the fact in that email that I send. So again, if you have to duck out early, it's totally okay. You're going to be receiving instructions for downloading this video, as well as a slideshow, so you can go through the slides at your own pace, and then our speakers' email addresses for those follow-up questions. And for those of you maybe that have never joined one of these webinars today through our monthly webinar series, you can reply to my follow-up email and just ask to be added to the mailing list. So you'll receive all of my future webinar invitations as well. So that's enough out of me. You didn't come here to tune in to hear me just talk about our webinar series. You can hear our speakers. And as you can see on the right, we've got kind of a handful of our speakers today. I'm not going to go over all of their bios because you've heard me blabbing on long enough, but I just wanted to say that we do have actually 3 of the 4 are here on the phone with us. Dr. David Anderson's a professor in the Department of Anthropology there in Knoxville at the University of Tennessee. We also have Eric Kansa directing and the principal software developer for Open Context, and Sarah, who's the executive director of the Alexandria Archive Institute. Those are the 3 we have on the phone. David's going to mostly be driving it. Eric and Sarah are around to answer questions and provide additional context, no pun intended. I think that's all I need to say. David, we got you there, ready to take things over?
Okay.
You should be in a second here. We're going to be seeing your screen in a moment. We see your entire screen right now, and there's your presentation.
Okay. Well, hello. I'm Dave Anderson, speaking on behalf of our DINAA project team. Eric and Sarah Kansa are here with us online and will be available to jump in as needed. and for the Q&A session after the formal part of the talk. Two of our team send regrets. Josh Wells had to teach, and Steve Yerka is in a tribal consultation meeting as we speak. The five of us, furthermore, are just the tip of an iceberg that involves many people, a team effort involving the help and support of many state, federal, and tribal partners, and many researchers. Finally, we'd like to thank our colleagues at the National Park Service, and Marcy Rockman and Matt Hawley in particular, for the invitation to participate in this series and for technical help with our research and this presentation. In recent years, concerns about the damaging effects of anthropogenic climate change have been amplified by the increasing frequency of destructive weather events, including large-scale wildfires and droughts, hurricanes and storm surges, and flooding. The vast preponderance of scientific evidence, furthermore, indicates sea levels will rise appreciably over the next several centuries, by circa 1 meter by the end of this century, by at least 3 to 5 meters or more in the 22nd century, and by an unknown but potentially very large amount thereafter, in the absence of effective efforts to ameliorate the underlying causes. In this presentation, we show how linking together archaeological and historic data at a large scale can be a powerful tool, not only for studying human life in the past, but also for evaluating possible developments in the future and planning for their mitigation. While the importance of climate change has been questioned in some quarters, many private organizations, as well as state and federal agencies like the National Park Service and the Department of Defense, to name a few, are taking the matter quite seriously, with significant effort directed to exploring how to preserve and protect our country's heritage and infrastructure from climate-related effects. The archaeological record in the United States is one of the most extensive in the world, with millions of sites and historic properties professionally reported, many with extensive associated collections, records, and reports. Some of the top archaeologists in the profession have argued that compiling and linking this information digitally for research, resource management, and public education purposes is one of the truly great challenges facing our profession. As this map of Georgia middle woodland sites and mounds shows, some individual states and land managing agencies have done a superb job of compiling and integrating these records, many in sophisticated GIS-linked databases. Such data are invaluable for examining settlement changes in the past, as these examples from Georgia show, documenting the changes that can occur in settlement over just a few hundred years, sometimes in response to changes in climate, vegetation, or in technology and social organization. Vast archaeological and historic data sets are maintained by state and federal agencies and individual installations, like this example from Fort Polk, Louisiana, where over 4,000 sites have been recorded. Only rarely, however, has this data been combined, that is, rendered interoperable at larger geographic scales. Typically, such efforts have been research-driven, documenting the occurrence of specific site types, feature or artifact categories like mound groups, or pottery or projectile point types. And only rarely have these efforts gone beyond the state level. Likewise rare have been detailed quantitatively based analyses documenting human responses to environmental change that encompass broad geographic and temporal scales. Here we show that this situation is rapidly changing for the better. An early effort involving archaeological site file managers in the mid-1990s led to the recognition that important information on settlement and land use could be found in the combined and mapped data. Showing concentrations during specific time periods, like this example of early Holocene, early Archaic sites in the southeast. Unfortunately, this effort languished due to the technology at the time, characterized by limited data storage and comparatively crude mapping procedures, and the fact that many states were only beginning to digitize their data and link it into GIS frameworks. A generation later, we are no longer bounded by such restrictions. Computer technology and programming and storage capabilities have come a long way. Cyber infrastructure development and data sharing is considered a critical part of 21st century science, including in archaeology and historic preservation. Here we discuss efforts underway to make archaeological data increasingly useful to research, management, and educational efforts at a large scale, and in the process help us to better understand past human settlement in the United States and beyond, as well as plan for changes in the future. With a wide array of colleagues in state and federal agencies, tribal nations, and a number of universities, a project linking disparate cultural and environmental data sets is currently underway. Linked archaeological data, as we shall demonstrate, can provide unparalleled insights into long-term human-environmental interactions and is crucial to making well-informed forecasts and policy decisions about the consequences of rapid climate change, extreme weather events, and displaced populations, factors that will shape our civilization profoundly in the coming decades. The Digital Index of North American Archaeology, or DINAA, was established in 2012 with the goal of integrating, or more accurately, rendering interoperable archaeological site file data, while providing links to information about specific sites in other databases, collections, and publications, using the formal site number as the common referent or indexing tool. These site data are also linked with natural system data sets encompassing physiography, biota, and climate in the past, present, and as projected into the future. DINAA is currently working with data from 20 states, primarily in Eastern North America, and with roughly 500,000 sites from 15 states currently rendered interoperable. This work has been done in consultation and cooperation with government, academic, and tribal stakeholders, and with funding from the National Science Foundation and the Institute of Museum and Library Services. In 2017, we are pleased to note the DINAA project was endorsed by the leadership of the Society for American Archaeology, the Society for Historical Archaeology, and the Archaeology Division of the American Anthropological Association. The SAA's Climate Change Strategies and Archaeological Resources Committee, under the leadership of Tom McGovern, has been particularly helpful as well. 4 workshops have been held to date involving site file and resource managers, researchers, public educators, and informatics specialists, with more planned for this year. Just bringing people together from differing states and agencies has helped us all see the strengths and weaknesses in our existing data and recording standards. In the process, we are examining what an archaeological site or historic property means to different groups, how people perceived and used landscapes in the past, and the kinds of information that should be consistently recorded that has occurred, and the sharing of skills and data. We've had booths at the last 3 SAAs, the last 2 NATPO meetings, and we'll have another booth this April at the SAAs. Please feel free to stop by and chat. So what is DINAA? Quite simply, it is a publicly accessible compilation of existing archaeological site file, collection, and report data from multiple regional, state, and local repositories. DINAA uses the site number as a basic identifier, linking archaeological data sets together, and the site locational data can then be used to link with paleoenvironmental data sets of very geographic scale and temporal resolution, encompassing physiography, climate, and biota in the past, present, and the future. Standardized temporal metadata using calibrated or calendar years serve as a relational control between data sets to permit analyses by selected time intervals. As such, DINAA is emerging as a tool of unprecedented power for understanding the causes and effects of coevolutionary change in human societies and the natural environments over the 15,000 years of human occupation in the New World. Information in state archaeological site files, artifacts and records in museum collections or curation repositories, or information in reports or journal articles can be linked using DINAA, providing a site number is one of the characteristics. A recent text mining effort undertaken in cooperation with JSTOR demonstrated the feasibility of finding sites in online journals such as American Antiquity. Site data in DINAA is being linked to, or rather points to, information in a wide range of online data repositories, using site numbers as the common denominator. DINA directs users to these outlets, but access and content control remains on their systems. Repositories with information currently indexed in DINA include TDAR, or the Digital Archaeological Record, a major curation repository of reports, data, and bibliographic references related to archaeology. The radiocarbon dates in CARD, or the Canadian, it's a global repository, so comprehensive radiocarbon database. Data in PIDBA, the Paleo-Indian Database of the Americas, a compilation of Pleistocene site and artifact data from across the continent. And information in the Eastern Woodlands Household Archaeology Data Project, a record of thousands of prehistoric structures built by First Peoples. These are just a few of the data types and repositories we are currently working with. DINA can be used to generate maps or search results with a few simple queries or clicks, giving the results in a useful digital format, and of great value for research and publication when examining distributions encompassing large areas or time periods. DINA conforms to legal requirements regarding the maintenance and use of cultural resource data. Precise site coordinates are neither published nor stored online, and the project redacts other sensitive attributes such as artifact or property ownership, specific directions to sites or find spots, or the presence of associated sacred objects or human remains. This is done in consultation with our partners, which include SHPO, agency, and other interested parties, including tribal nations. Only coarse-grained locational information is given for site and artifact locations, with a resolution no finer than the county level, or a circa 0.176 degree, it's roughly a 20 by 20 kilometer grid cell, is presented in DINA. Specific geospatial data and the permission to use it must be obtained from the agencies maintaining the information. Our output does give directions to offices, addresses, and so on to contact to obtain such information, but DINA does not itself maintain or release such data. While we are currently focusing on the 49 continental United States, similar systems can be adopted just about anywhere, and indeed our team members have worked with colleagues in Australia and Europe on similar efforts. A distributed network, DINA provides some of the benefits of centralization without requiring different and typically financially strapped state and federal agencies, site file managers, or individual researchers to change their own systems. As such, our approach fosters independent development and experimentation while allowing researchers, resource managers, and interested members of the public online access to linked heritage and environmental data at broad scale. Open source translational protocols thus allows integration of data sets from many different and otherwise incompatible sources into a single interface. DINA thus embraces current best practices in scientific data management, including open standards and open licensing, transparent version control of both data and source code, linked data, and iterative development. DINA digital data, including all constituent software, are maintained online by Open Context and archived with the California Digital Library, a world leader in digital preservation. The data are also mirrored in a number of repositories in the US and internationally to ensure the long-term survival of the information. While presently focused on the United States, the DINA informatics structure can be adopted anywhere, something we encourage by the use of open source, open access programming and data. We are always seeking new data providers and others willing to provide assistance. DINA information are also recorded by the Pelagios Project, a community and infrastructure for linked open geodata in the humanities. Pelagios links historical materials through their common reference to particular places. What this example illustrates is that making non-sensitive data openly available with no login and no intellectual property strings means it can be easily accessed and used by many people. DINA is being used because it employs open standards that other systems and their operators can understand. Pelagios particularly harvests data from open context where DINA is housed, and DINA has become one of its largest data contributors. As of February 2018, personnel from 20 states are actively participating in DINA's development, and the project has initiated discussions with many of the site file managers and governing authorities in the remaining 29 states in continental North America and in many other countries, with the goal of developing a continental database, a truly continental database. Somewhat surprisingly, developing partnerships has proved a far greater challenge than the technical aspects of creating the linked database and online infrastructure. Some administrators have been reluctant to make information available for reasons given such as lack of staff time, a belief that their data is of poor quality, concerns about data security, or in a few cases, an unwillingness to share information. These concerns are usually overcome when the potential partner sees that the DINAA team infuses responsible legal and ethical practices regarding information management into everything we do. Every DINAA team member working with site data is a registered professional archaeologist, for example. Participation in DINAA is likewise not hard. To integrate state data into the national effort, a single database table, spreadsheet, or even text file of site numbers and associated information is all that is needed. A transfer that can be accomplished in minutes with secure file transfer protocols in place. The DINAA team cleans the file using tools like OpenRefine and then randomly places the sites into 20 by 20 kilometer grid cells for public mapping purposes. Primary locational data, which again is only maintained in offline computers and encrypted files during this phase, is then permanently deleted. DINAA does not maintain specific locational data. Anyone interested in such data has to contact the agencies maintaining it. Our partnership agreements are commonly formal documents detailing terms of data access and use and how state authorities or agency authorities are to be contacted. DINAA indexing thus does not supplant, but rather assists and enhances information management by agencies, as well as access and regulatory authority. DINAA is neither designed nor capable of serving as a primary source for compliance activities. However, because of its flexibility and ease of access, some states are already using DINAA for public education purposes to display where sites are on the landscape at various points in time. The DINAA team has taken a long view and a positive approach to working with researchers, states, tribal nations, and federal agencies interested in partnering with us, and we always hope to persuade more to join in the effort. We have no doubt that as DINAA capabilities become better known and used, the blank spots on maps and in data searches will increasingly fill in. In the remainder of this talk, we examine how data like this can be used to examine population trends over time and the effect of climate change on archaeological and historic properties. Information in DINAA offers the opportunity to determine how many components and artifacts, potential proxy measures of human populations, have been found and recorded to date by time period. Of 166,550 components in DINAA that could be dated to a specific Native American period of occupation, only 4,014, less than 3% of the total, have Pleistocene or Paleo-Indian components, suggesting population density was quite low, at least when compared with later periods. The top bar graph shows the total number of sites per major time period, and the bottom bar graph shows the same data, standardized, giving numbers of sites per century, since these major time periods differ considerably in length. Thus, while the total number of sites drops in the Mississippian following the woodland period, when these numbers are standardized per century, as you see in the bottom, a major increase is actually occurring, since the Mississippian period is only 600 years long, while the woodland period is over 2,000 years. Overall, the numbers of components grow very rapidly in the early Holocene, slowed in the mid-Holocene, and then grew very dramatically over the course of the late Holocene. Indeed, nearly an order of magnitude increase in components per century is evident between the Paleo-Indian and early Archaic periods, followed by little to no change in the Middle Archaic, after which there was a near doubling or tripling in each of the subsequent late Archaic, woodland, and Mississippian periods. These trends show human population grew very rapidly following the initial colonization of the Americas, then slowed their growth for several millennia, and then grew rapidly again as local populations developed increasingly intensive agriculture and more complex forms of social organization. Large artifact data sets, as well as some probability distributions of radiocarbon dates, are other ways to examine population trends at regional scales, and the fact that we now have links between PIDBA and CARD with DINAA means that these forms of combined analyses should become more common in the future. Using DINAA, site locational information was also plotted against elevation to predict losses to our common heritage due to sea level rise in the coming years. In November 2017, our project team published a paper on this subject in PLOS One, an open access journal, in keeping with our philosophy of sharing information freely and not putting it behind paywalls. In this paper, we examined the effects of sea level rise and human population relocation using a sample from 9 states encompassing much of the Gulf and Atlantic coast of the southeastern United States. The paper caused a bit of a stir, with articles about it appearing in dozens of media outlets around the world. The online technical paper has had over 25,000 views, indicating considerable interest in the work, not typical in my professional experience, so that was very gratifying. Data from nearly 130,000 sites were examined, extending from the Texas-Louisiana border to the Maryland-Virginia area, and encompassing all sites within 200 kilometers of the modern coastline. The 200-kilometer buffer was used to assess the numbers of recorded properties at various elevations further inland, where populations may be forced to relocate, or along portions of the coast where the construction of seawalls might be considered. A 10-meter horizontal resolution digital elevation model from publicly available USGS Geological Survey datasets was spatially joined with the archaeological data to determine site elevations, and hence how many sites would be affected by sea level rises at 1-meter intervals. It is clear that small increases in sea level will have great consequences in the coastal archaeological record. Projected sea level rise within the coming century, as well as in the centuries after, will result in the loss of a substantial portion of the record of both pre-contact and historic human habitation of the coastal margin. This information, by the way, is available in the published paper, and these tables will be available to those requesting this talk afterwards. Large numbers of recorded sites are within 1-meter vertical elevation of modern sea level, and generally to within 1 to 3 meters. Interestingly, however, the numbers drop off markedly above 3 meters across the region. Large numbers of people in the southeast thus appear to have lived in close proximity to the coast in recent millennia, at least in terms of elevation. The same trends are true, as we shall see, with modern populations. In the study area, circa 19,000 known archaeological sites will be covered given a 1-meter rise, which is projected for the next century, and nearly 30,000 sites will be covered if sea level rise continues as predicted to between 3 to 5 meters in the century or two after that. These numbers, of course, are only for known and recorded sites. Since survey coverage is incomplete, the numbers of actual sites impacted will be much higher. The National Register of Historic Places, or NRHP, is another online database encompassing archaeological sites, standing structures, battlefields, landscapes, sacred sites, and other cultural properties that have been determined to be significant in American history. Over 1,000 locations already listed as eligible on the National Register of Historic Places will be submerged given a 1-meter rise, with nearly another 1,000 lost given a 3 to 5 meter rise. These numbers include many iconic places in American history, such as St. Augustine, portions of Jamestown, the Battery in Charleston, and many sites created by First Peoples. Many of these sites, of course, are national parks or national monuments. While some archaeological sites are included in the NRHP eligible properties, many of these, of course, are historic buildings and landscapes. And I would note that the numbers that are actually listed are far fewer than are present. There are about 100,000 cemeteries in the United States. Only 6,000 of them are in the states listed in DINAA. They're not typically widely recorded, but cemeteries will be lost as well. Sea level rise will also inundate large areas of the eastern and Gulf coasts of the United States and displace large numbers of people, even if major construction projects occur to protect critical population and economic centers. Even if dike and dam building does occur, though, it can only encompass small areas and will itself damage cultural resources in the areas the fill comes from. Data on the amount of land loss per state by 1 meter increments of sea level rise was derived from 1 arcsecond or 30 square meter resolution digital elevation models prepared by the United States Geological Survey. For states like Florida, with extensive low-lying terrain and a lengthy coastal margin, the area that could be lost is quite substantial. Finally, the numbers of people impacted can also be calculated. Population data are derived from 2013 estimates produced as part of the ongoing LandScan initiative undertaken by the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Over 3 million people in the Southeast currently live in areas at or below 1 meter above mean sea level, and hence are likely to be displaced in the next century, given current projections for sea level rise. The displacement of millions of people due to rising seas will cause additional impacts on historic resources where these populations resettle. Our species has, however, witnessed comparable periods of dramatic sea level change in the past. At the end of the last ice age, as the vast ice sheets on land were melting, much as is happening in Greenland today, shorelines were moving inland at 1 kilometer or more a decade. These resulted in population movements throughout the region, with interior areas becoming more densely settled than before. We can expect no less to occur in the years to come. To conclude, given the large numbers of cultural resources threatened by sea level rise, as well as other effects of climate change, using big data sets to develop protection and mitigation strategies should proceed. And indeed, many researchers and government agencies within the United States and beyond are doing just this, including many of you listening. One method of proceeding, we believe, is to use the entire known sample of cultural resources to document the kinds, numbers, and assessed importance of properties that will be lost overall and within specific areas. Developing such a comprehensive database is what we are trying to do with DINAA. Such information can help develop systems for survey, triage, and mitigation to cultural resources in coastal regions, including identifying areas and site types currently under-examined. How humanity faces the loss of its coastal heritage concurrent with the displacement of millions of people will test national capabilities and global civilization generally by creating vast numbers of culturally displaced refugees and placing great pressures on existing social fabrics. Cultural resources are a critical factor to consider when planning mitigation strategies. They are essential to our sense of self and well-being, our understanding of history, and a continuing source of inspiration. The importance of continental data sets, we argue, will only grow in the future as archaeological data are increasingly used to address human responses to changes in climate, biota, sea level, and physiography. Fostering networking and data integration among multiple partners will transform the practice of resource management. How we address these challenges can provide valuable lessons and hope for the future as we move forward into an interesting and increasingly uncertain world. Please urge your agency leaders as well as state SHPOs and archaeologists and site file managers to join us if they haven't already. Thank you, and now we'll turn it over to questions.
Hey, thank you for that, David. Yeah, as David said, your questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel is the way to do questions. Rather than fooling around with trying to mute and unmute people and having all kinds of weird computer audio echoes, we're just going to use that questions box. So go ahead and get those typed in. Those will come to me, and then I'll be passing them on to our speakers. My first question, and actually this is a great slide to have up for this question. You know, I'm thinking about our park down there at Gulf Shores National Seashore down there in southern Mississippi, and I see that that's one of the states not included on here. Can you just provide an overview of why some states are on here, which ones aren't, and what exactly is going on in this situation?
Eric, do you want to take that, or Sarah?
I'll answer part of that, and then Dave, you should probably chime in with more. So again, what Dave was saying, some states are sometimes changing their own internal information systems and migrating to different databases, and their data are in a state of flux, and some site file managers feel that their data aren't ready yet for a public release in a form like DINAA. So that's part of the issue, and I think that that's probably the case in the state of Mississippi, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and I also, this is Sarah, I'd just like to chime in and add to that, that with Open Context, we work with a lot of individual researchers sharing their data, and even just one person trying to share even a small data set, it can be a big challenge in terms of cleanup and feeling ready, not feeling scared someone might, steal their information, whatever. So this is, on a large scale like this, there are a lot of challenges in terms of resources, of time, and the effort that needs to be put into getting these things ready for sort of prime time. So it can take some time.
Last bit about that is that, and this is one of the things that is useful about the DINAA project, is that we actually offer a lot of those cleanup services to help make the data more useful and more broadly useful. And that's actually one of the things that a lot of the SHPOs who have worked with us have found very useful, because we've cleaned up data sets, and we've shown use of really interesting and powerful tools to help them clean up their own data, tools like Open Refine. And so the process is actually, so once we get over the initial hurdle of people making that commitment, it's actually a painless process, even though they feel like, oh my gosh, it might be a pain. But we actually do help with a lot of these things that they would otherwise shy away from.
Great.
I think that's an excellent answer, and I agree with that. And again, we're willing to work with anybody, and the networking aspects of this have been pretty wonderful. Just having site file managers being able to work with each other is just helping improve the standards across the board. They're sharing information and ideas. And we're developing data sets where we can learn great things about the past. I mean, there's a lot of research questions being explored just with the sample we have, and a lot more will come in the future.
All right, we've got a bunch of questions rolling in. Here's a couple from two different people, but I think they go together thematically. So I'm going to ask them kind of together. First is how, basically about the data fuzzing. How is a data fuzzing value decided to masking locality information? And is this an officially, in quotes, designated value? And then a follow-up from someone else actually was, if this data is coarsened, how do we account for the lack of precision when predicting which sites will be submerged by sea level rise and when? So kind of a two-parter, is learning the logistics of the data fuzzing, and then how does that impact with predictions and projections?
Well, with regard to the second part, we did use, we had permission to use the primary exact locational data for the sea level rise study. With regard to the first part, Eric, do you want to take that, or Sarah?
Yeah, so it is that roughly sort of 20-kilometer grid or so that we reduce precision for site location is mainly a general consensus that was acceptable by the different site file managers and SHPOs that have been working with us. But you'll see on the current slide that Dave has up that the state of Ohio looks kind of funny, and the site file manager, the SHPOs there, required that the location information be essentially derived from the county centroid. So that's why it's a little bit different for the state of Ohio, and also what we have next to it in Pennsylvania. So there is a little bit of sort of a lack of consensus, but generally speaking, that roughly 20-kilometer grid is something that most site file managers have accepted. Some states actually have public information at even higher precision. So the state of Iowa, location information is publicly available with somewhat higher precision than what DINA makes available. But for the most part, we're at a level that was acceptable by most of the states.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate that. Let's see, we have another one coming in, basically just curious about the plan for long-term maintenance and growth of the database.
Eric and Sarah, you're about 20, 30 years younger than I am, so.
Yeah, I mean, this is always a challenge because essentially the DINA and open context in general are basically giving away other people's data for free. And so that's something that is not necessarily the easiest thing to sustain, especially if you have ethics in mind. So we can't do advertising, we don't collect user data. In fact, we're very careful about privacy issues and everything like that. So what we do plan for with DINA and for longer term sustainability is a multi-pronged approach. First prong is that, again, as what Dave said, we archive the data in multiple different repositories that have longevity associated with it. So if the DINA project itself and if open context itself can't be sustained over the long term, the data are secured and archived and protected in long-term institutional repositories, basically university libraries. Second approach to this is that open context is referenced by the National Science Foundation and also the National Endowment for the Humanities for grant data management. And we do charge service fees for grant data management in order to prepare data and also to put these data into repositories. That is an area where we do make some earned income. And then the last area where we're currently developing sustainability, financial sustainability measures is in working with the library museum community to establish essentially a consortium where we provide professional services and publishing these sorts of data. And the libraries and museums allocate a certain portion of their own budgets to help sustain those efforts. And then you know that university libraries buy subscriptions for, journals, commercial journals. And so one of the aspects that we're exploring is finding ways to use some of that acquisition budget to sustain open data and open access kinds of publishing, as DINA as an example.
And we are, of course, we have been funded by the National Science Foundation, but we are, of course, always looking at new solicitations that are coming out, and would this be something appropriate for us to attempt to obtain funding from? Basically, this has been a fairly low-cost effort to date, and a lot of our efforts have gone into just trying to obtain information, workshops, meeting with people. If we actually had the data in hand, it wouldn't be that expensive to produce this at a national level. And as Eric said, it is archived in a way so that even if individuals move on, that the information will be maintained. And an important part of that is the informatics structure itself. How are things linked together? How does the indexing work? So that's why we, at the end of the formal part of the talk, we said, we hope you'll join us in terms of providing information. And then if you have any ideas about how we could work with or assist agencies, state or federal agencies, we are talking with people in a number of federal agencies as well. We'd love to hear about it. Thank you.
Great. I have a few questions about kind of the specific database and the data itself. And before getting into that, I wanted to ask, here's another one that came in. that is admittedly the author writes is kind of a leading question, but you noted that the DINAA analysis included sites that have been identified, obviously. Is there a way to use DINAA to highlight areas that have not been surveyed? She went on to write, this is a bit of a leading question because I want to know about which areas that haven't been surveyed and might be at most risk.
I can start with this and then turn it over to Eric and Sarah. One thing, if you just look at the DINAA map, the blue map of the 15 or so states, other than Ohio and Pennsylvania, where it's recorded by county for the most part, major concentrations on the map are locations of national parks, military bases, national forests, and so on in many cases. Now, the central Mississippi Valley, there's tremendous numbers of sites. That was a great place to live in the past. But just one of the things that we're learning from this is the extent of survey coverage in different areas, different parts of the landscape. So having this information at this scale lets us know where places have been looked at in certain environmental zones and where they haven't. Over.
And I think to add to that, it's just something in terms of the growth of open data that you can access when you're doing your research or exploration. We do need to be savvy users of that data to know that there are going to be missing areas, and it's not because there are no sites there or no finds there, it's because no one's actually looked, and or they didn't collect that data, etc. There's a lot there, so we have to be savvy going into working with a data set to ask the right questions about how was this data collected, and what am I really seeing patterns, or am I just, or is this a artifact of the way the data was collected or not collected?
Yeah, it's absolutely the case. This is, you know, it reminds me of the, you know, like the London Underground, where it mined the gap. It would be much, moving forward, a project like DINAA, and as we try to explore these kinds of issues, may motivate some changes in the way that the databases are constructed, and the way that this information are managed. And one thing that we can see is that there's a really clear need for SHPOs and other sorts of agencies to also try to document which areas have seen more intensive survey and which areas have not seen more intensive survey. And so then we can start trying to understand the biases that might be inherent in these kinds of data sets. So this is probably, I would imagine, like an interesting first step in iteration in the way that these sorts of information can be managed over the long term. Over.
All right. I think that we got a few more that have come in. So here's some just more specifically about the database itself. What is the technology, the underlying database system, and the query interface?
All right. Okay, I could take that one on. So Open Context, which is hosting DINAA, is a fully open source software application that is using the Python Django framework. And the backend database, a data store for it, is a Postgres database. It's an open source database management system. The actual data structure is very graph-like, but we're not using a triple store for a variety of reasons. And then the index that indexes all of the different site entities and other entities in DINAA and other projects that Open Context publish is we use a software application called Apache Solr. And Apache Solr is widely used in library and other information management systems. It supports faceted search and is nice and scalable, and it's pretty fast. The overall approach of this is that we emphasize, as Dave was talking about, linked data, in that every entity, in the case of DINAA, most of the entities are archaeological sites. Every entity has its own stable web URI, so you can point to it and link to it. And we also link to the controlled vocabularies and other data that are published elsewhere on the web. So one resource that we link up DINAA to is something called GeoNames, which is a gazetteer, an open source gazetteer. We're also linking DINAA to our own controlled vocabularies of time periods. In each archaeological time period will have its own URI. And we link to other people's data too. So there's a project called Period O, which is maintaining a database of archaeological and historical time periods, and we cross-reference with that. And with all that sort of cross-referencing with these links, these web links, helps provide the semantic glue that allows us to manage the information in a way that we can provide a common query interface across everything. And so the software stack is pretty common in terms of a lot of web systems use this kind of thing. There's nothing particularly fancy about it. What our main approach, though, that is somewhat different is that unlike a conventional repository, everything in open context and with DINAA is dynamically queryable online, whereas a conventional repository is you basically download a big spreadsheet or a big data table, and then you work with it on your own system independently. So we can make mass downloads like that available, but we also provide this sort of dynamic querying of very specific kinds of information because we host that information at a very granular level. Over.
Everyone has very good radio etiquette. That's great. Yeah, thanks, Eric. I think that was hopefully comprehensive enough to answer that question. There was a follow-up that was just wanted just if you could give a quick overview of an example of some core attributes that are hosted in DINAA.
Right, Dave, do you want to talk about that? Okay, to start, and then Eric and Sarah can continue on. Basically, what we take is what is in the state site file records that they provide to us, and typically that's a site number, and then there'll be time periods associated, perhaps diagnostic artifacts listed by type, perhaps a site type like the presence of mounds or shell debris, shellfish debris, things like that. What we will also do is when we get that data, we redact sensitive information about if there are, say, human burials or remains present, exact locational information, things like that, directions on how to find the site, that is redacted. But typically we take what we get, and some states have much greater level of detail in terms of time periods, cultural affiliations than others. Some states have just a prehistoric, historic dichotomy in terms of classifying their sites digitally. Others have very detailed records down to perhaps century or so scale in the historic period and a few century or so scale in the last few thousand years. We work with that information, and making it interoperable across a large area is part of what we do. Over.
Yeah, so exactly what Dave said in terms of because there's so much variability across states and how the site file data sets are structured and the attributes they provide, we take what we get, and in order to provide some attributes that are common across everything, then we do these associations, these links to a common controlled vocabulary, especially with respect to time. But we also express the information that the states provide us, including things like location information and whatnot, using common formats and common standards. So it's a way of what we do with this is that even though there's going to be sometimes different attributes across different states, at least we can provide a common format of expression for all of that and some common indexing of all of that. So every single record is available in an open format called GeoJSON, which is a widely used standard for expressing geospatial data. And similarly, every query result is also available in that format called GeoJSON. So it makes the it provides that level of interoperability, and then where we can do more in terms of semantics, we do that if the attributes are present in the state data set. So time period is one of those things that we've been able to link most of the states with, according to a common vocabulary for time periods. But one state, I believe North Carolina in particular, didn't provide that level of information where we could do that linking. So if you do searches for, say, like early archaic or something, North Carolina is not going to show up because we just don't have that attribute data.
And I think it's important to emphasize as well, just that we don't change the original data. We're just adding on to it to make this interoperability possible. But the original data, and this is with all data in open context that we publish, we leave the original data and just add on to it in order to enable that.
That's correct. Yeah, so it's we try to retain these original attributes in the way that data sources describe things. And in order to provide more interoperability across different data sets, then we add these extra annotations on top of it.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things we've been doing is every year now for about 4 or 5 years, we've been contacting the site file managers and chapeaus in the 49 continental United States. And we'll continue to do that, and with the idea that hopefully DINA will grow. I oversaw the development of the Paleo-Indian database of the Americas, and it took us about 10 or 15 years to get partners in every state, Canadian province, and so on. So that's why I said we take a long view and a positive view, and we're just glad to, when people decide to work with us and join us, but we'll still keep asking. Over.
Great, thanks. I have a couple questions that are similar in that they're two-parters. This first question came in, and I thought, oh, I think we answered that, and I wrote back to say, hey, did that answer? And then they followed up with some more clarification. So I'm going to read to you both the first and the second part of question number 1 here. So the first was, I understand that the data here are only displayed within a 20-kilometer grid, but that degree of spatial resolution is not useful for landscape conservation design efforts. Can you speak to the resolution of the underlying data with respect to accuracy and reliability? And then my follow-up when asking if you'd answered that already was, well, no, not exactly answered yet. We are working on integrating cultural resource data into ongoing LCD efforts. So hearing this team's assessment of what the underlying potential in the data is would be helpful. Who wants to take a crack at that one?
Do you want to start, Eric, and then I can, or Sarah, and I can follow up?
Sure. Yeah, as far as like the utility of the spatial data, yeah, there are obvious limitations to working with data at this sort of more coarse grained spatial resolution. But we are a public-facing website and that's part of our mission. And one of the aspects of that, speaking to the utility, is that no, this is not something that DINA is not something that you could use with compliance, and it's not something necessarily useful for that sort of specific fine-grained planning, like at a regional or a park level. But what it is useful for is that there's the model that we have, the sort of approach we have for integrating these different kinds of data sets, one can use with much more specific location information. There's nothing to limit the, there's nothing that says the 20-kilometer grid is hard-coded in that, but you would have to do that within a more secure computing environment in order to protect that location information, because it is sensitive information. So the model is useful for somebody who wants to deploy it within a more secure kind of a computing context. So that's something that you can consider. But even at the sort of public level of exposure where we can map things at a coarse grain for public use, it's that one of the other real values of this is that we are linking these site records with all sorts of different kinds of information that are scattered across different repositories on the web. So Dave showed these maps and examples of mapping out the journal coverage, say, for the journal American Antiquity. But we could also do similar things with the Federal Register, which is providing public notification of regulatory decisions made by the federal government. And those are really powerful uses, because then you can start seeing, at least at the course grade level, where's scholarly attention being focused in terms of archaeology? Where are federal agencies making decisions about the archaeological past that might impact members of tribal nations? So there's several different kinds of uses that are important kinds of uses, even at a low level of spatial resolution. And that's something that we would do with DINA. If you want to do this at a more specific level, then deploying something like this within a more secure computing environment is an option, but that's not something that we do ourselves.
And to follow up on that, one of the things that comes out with any search that's produced or any map that's generated is a listing of all of the sites that are so queried, and instructions on how to get more specific information. Where is that information held? What is the repository? So while we do not give out nor maintain or give out exact locational information, we do provide directions as to who you would need to contact to obtain that. Over.
Great. Yeah, both perspectives. Appreciate that. Here's another one where it's kind of a two-parter. There was a question asked that I thought another question answered, and then they clarified with some more background. So I'll ask them both. Are survey coverage data available in DINA? And if so, is it possible to use survey coverage to understand where there are spatial gaps in the availability of data? The follow-up was, I think the leading question was about predictive modeling, but the answer didn't go there. To put it another way, can you tell which areas have been surveyed other than through the presence of sites in a course into location?
This is David. And as Sarah and Eric said, we take what we get, and if the states provide us with files that have where sites are and where coverage has been conducted, yes, then we have that information. But that's something that, as an early iteration of working at a national scale, that's something that is immediately evident that is needed. Some states do have information on where coverage has occurred and the kinds of coverage. Other states don't. And one of the things that DINA is doing is it's showing us what should we be considering when we're moving forward in the future, both as state or agency site file managers, and then what is the best way to link or integrate this information. Over.
Anyone else chiming in on that one, or is happy with David's answer?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I mean, again, I think that this is part of a learning process too, and doing a better job of recording and documenting where we are looking and the intensity of where we're looking for sites and where we're not looking. That's also part of the, that's something that I think that we could do a better job modeling and documenting in our databases, and that will obviously inform future analyses and better account for different observational and selection biases that are inherent in using these sorts of data.
Great, thank you, Eric. And I know Eric has to bounce here in a little bit, so as a reminder, you will be able to ask follow-up questions by email, since I am providing all of our speakers email addresses. So even though Eric, I know we have to lose you in a second, Eric did tell me he is still happy to respond to specific questions by email. In the meantime, I have two more questions that have coming in, and there's someone just asking for an overview of why exactly is kind of all this data available in the Southeast. What about the western half of the country?
Well, part of this is Dave Anderson talking. I've worked in the Southeast for over 40 years, and I know a lot of the people here. I oversaw the early effort in the 90s where I brought together site file managers from across the Southeast. So a lot of it is personal contact. It's knowing people, building relationships, working with colleagues. And when we started this project, We worked in the southeast and east because that's where we knew the most people. And we have contacted people in the other states, the West, as well. And it's, as we've said, it's just a slow process, a trust-building exercise, building a comfort level, and that's why we hope things like the sea level study show the possibilities of data linkage like this. Over.
Thanks, Dave. It sounds like we are down to our final question, unless others come in the next little bit here. Our last one is, in addition to the sea level rise study you conducted, are there examples of other broadly scaled analyses you are aware of and can share that have made use of DINAA data?
Yes, there's a paper by Karen Smith, Keith Stevenson, that is coming out in a new issue of Southeastern Archaeology that looks at woodland settlement distribution in the Southeast using DINAA data. Another research project that a number of us are working on is using DINAA information as a proxy for where human populations were on the landscape over time, and then comparing that with vegetation structure and change in vegetational communities to see if humans influenced the spread, for example, of certain species, oaks, hickories, and so on. We have people that have looked at woodland site distributions elsewhere in the mid-south and southeast up to Ohio. There's a study that has been conducted using the data for that. Again, the information is out there. We encourage anyone to use it. It's only been at this level of utility for about a year or so now. So thank you for helping us get the message out about it, because it's open. We want people to use it. A lot of our goal is just to foster communication and to help us build tools that'll help us do archaeology better and resource management better in the 21st century. Over.
Yeah, thank you. There's a couple more uses, some of which are we're now trying to integrate these data into other scientific data systems, especially around paleo environmental databases and organism databases, especially to have some sort of describe things over periods of time. So there are databases called, there's one called VertNet, another one called Neotoma, which are documenting species distribution over time. And these different databases are, we're building ties, and they're starting to integrate DINAA into their own services. So the information is getting reused in other information systems. And Dave already showed that slide of the Pelagios project is already incorporated DINAA also. So it's not just used in publications, but it's also being incorporated into other scientific and humanities databases. Over. And I apologize, I have to run now, so I'm sorry. Thank you for everybody, and thank you, Matt, for organizing this. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. And well, I just wanted to give, we didn't have any more questions that have popped in, so I just wanted to give a chance if Dave or Sarah, any parting words for the good of the order for us?
Eric or Sarah?
Eric's out the door, but Sarah?
Yeah, no, I just really appreciate your time, and we are very interested in collaborating with partners in different federal agencies. I think that there's a lot of potential, especially as we look to the west of the United States, where federal lands are and federal management of lands is an important aspect of the way that these data may be managed right now. Federal partnerships are something that we're going to be very interested in fostering and developing. So I really appreciate everybody's attention in the seminar. So thank you.
And I'll echo what Eric said. Thank you all for listening. And anything we can do to help you or vice versa, anything you can do to help us would be appreciated. This is a tool that is, we think, has great potential, will be very helpful in what we all do. And you're seeing it more or less at the ground floor. But again, it's openly available. Anyone is welcome to use the software. We're trying to just help us all do our jobs better in archaeology and resource management. So I enjoyed the opportunity to talk with you. I worked for the Park Service for 15 years. Now I'm a college professor, but I still have a tremendous sense of respect and appreciation for what state and federal agency and TIPO managers, resource managers do. So thanks again for listening, and feel free to email any of us with any additional questions. We'll do our best to answer them. And thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thanks to all of you and for everyone for tuning in. Like Dave just said, we'll be sending follow-up emails that will have their email addresses in them, so you can contact them directly for additional information, clarification, links that you need. I'll also include in that email instructions for downloading the presentation file as well as the video recording itself. So you'll be able to follow along. And actually, I think I have, Dave, your notes as well with the written portion or the written script that you had for the presentation. So you can hear Dave's voice or you can skim through it on your own. We've given you all kinds of options. So thanks to all of you for tuning in. Hope you all enjoy the rest of your Thursday and have a great February. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you all.
Thank you.